Assalamualaikum and greeting to Dr. Farah and my fellow friends who are watching this video. Today, my group will be presenting a discussion of issues related to the development of materials for ESL learners. Before that, let me introduce my group members. We are from Group 9 from class BIP3014, Group D. My group consists of 6 members. First is Nursyaidatul Najeeha Binti Sonny. Second is Mohamad Hatim Haikal bin Sobri. Next is me, Nadirah Binti Mohamad Affandi. The fourth is Afiqah Aina Binti Mohamad Mazuan. Amira Alwani Binti Azizan. And the last one is Nurul Aina Binti Mohamad K.Y.Tiang. Moving on to the next slide, according to Tomlinson, materials are anything which is used to help language learners to learn. Materials can be in the form, for example, of a textbook, a workbook, a photocopied handout, a newspaper, a paragraph written on a whiteboard, anything which presents or informs about the language being learned. For the materials to be valuable, the learning points should be potentially useful to the learners, and that the learning procedures should maximize the likelihood of the learners actually learning what they want and need to learn. Apart from that, the skill that we have chosen is reading skills, and the material that we are focused on is textbook. So, based on our findings, there are some problems and ways to improve the materials by referring to Tomlinson 2013 proposed basic principles of second language acquisition that relevant to the development of materials for the teaching of languages.
Hi all, I am Nurul Aina Binti Mohamad K.Y.Tiang. Alright, before jumping into the main content of our presentation, which talks about the problem and the solution regarding the materials in teaching reading skills, allow me to talk briefly about the characteristics of materials that are typically used in reading lesson. Okay, normally what we have been seeing in an ESL classroom that actually is considered as a must material, it would be the course book, which includes the textbook and the workbook. Obviously, any lesson that is fully revolves around a list of written guidelines with the usage of a textbook, it can be viewed as syllabus-based teaching. Besides that, this kind of material also makes use of text-based approach, which encourages language learners to actively respond to the reading text. Such a book provides core materials that usually works on vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation, and the targeted language skills. In other words, using this book is like an emphasis on the drillings and the practices on word recognition, comprehension, as well as the language accuracy. So now let's get right into the problems and the solution.
My name is Mohamad Hatim Haikal bin Sobri, and I'll be presenting on the first problems. The first problem is material provided in the textbook are not engaging. The activities in the textbook do not encourage communication between learners and teachers. This happened because the instruction did not invite learners to actively communicate with each other and with their teacher. As a result, the learners were not motivated to interact with friends by using English to discuss the topic, given for reading and missed opportunities to make use of the activities which can get the learners to think and feel before, during and after using the target language for communication. For the next point, most illustrations incorporated into the textbook are dull. Due to this, learner will never express any enthusiasm because of the graphic provided in the textbook in the reading material, which is one of the main tools that can be used in catching learners' attention. This happened because of the lack of color in the illustration and visual used to support the reading text in the textbook. It is important that the picture and illustration in the textbook are attractive and leave an impact on the student, grab student attention and interest to motivate them to develop their own curiosity and thought process. Tomlinson affirmed that if learners are not experiencing any emotion while being exposed to the language in use, they are unlikely to learn anything. Feeling of pleasure, happiness, empathy, amusement, excitement, and stimulation are all likely to have a beneficial impact on acquisition. Okay, so let's proceed to the solution to the first problem. Material should achieve impact by improving the quality of the illustration in the textbook. The reading material should be supported by colorful pictures and illustration to gain student interest. A good English textbook should be fully illustrated and should be relevant to the situation presented in the reading material. A few color plates should also be in the textbook to appeal to the learner's eye. Moreover, the reading material should diversify the use of illustration and picture in the text with many varieties of local places and culture so that it can increase the interaction of the reading material, which is very beneficial for the learners. Based on Tomlinson, an attractive presentation will help to increase the learning process taken in by the student. Next, material should provide learners with opportunities to use the target language to achieve communicative purpose instead of only practicing the language in conditions controlled by the materials. Provide the learners with the opportunity to engage it for communication. Learners will benefit from communicative interaction because it can provide them with a new input as well as the output, becoming an informative source of input. What happened in the classroom must involve the learner and must leave the beneficial effects on them. And the focus of every task should be to facilitate learners for having a discussion, for example, student experiences with school, culture, and the local.
Second problem is reading materials are confusing and incomprehensible. Textbook reading materials are too lengthy. Lengthy reading materials will only bore students. This will lead them to lose focus faster in the middle of reading. Therefore, students will encounter the difficulties to grasp the main context of the text. Essentially, the primary goal of reading is to gain comprehension. This cannot be achieved if students keep on losing their focus and not being able to understand the primary context of the text. Next, textbook materials also uses high English level. Materials that uses high English level that does not suit student level will only make students feel inferior while reading. This is because the level of English in the material does not prior to the student's knowledge. The unfamiliarity of English word does not trigger students' background knowledge for vocabulary and will eventually lead to students feeling anxious while reading. This will result for students not being able to understand the main context of reading materials. As a result, referring to the basic principle of Tomlinson 2030, which are materials should help learners feel at ease and material should take into account that learners differ affective attitude. Ways that could be taken to tackle this problem is first, reading material should be given according to students' level. This is to make sure that students feel at ease when reading. According to Tomlinson 2013 too, students feel more relaxed with materials that tries to help them and make them feel at ease rather than the ones that make them feel challenged. Reading materials that are given according to students' level will help reduce the feeling of anxious and constantly challenged during the reading, or in other words, making them feel at ease when reading. This kind of reading material will help trigger students' background knowledge for familiar vocabulary, thus leading them to being able to understand the main context of the text. Next, provide variety of text. According to Tomlinson 2030, this is to ensure that the reading material can cater to different users of the material. This is because providing more than one reading material could help to adapt with different users of materials in the class. This can be done by asking students to make a list of topics that they are interested in and try to adapt into reading materials.
Next, I will be presenting on the third problem, textbook content is irrelevant. Firstly, why textbook content is irrelevant is because textbook doesn't take students' background knowledge into account. For example, the text in the textbook don't contain topics that the students like, probably history fact that they don't really want to know, or a topic about activities that are not their hobby. Hence, they will find the text uninteresting, which will affect their reading motivation. So, if teacher uses textbook as the only reading materials in class, it means that the teacher does not tailor lessons to the specific attributes and interests of students. Secondly, students cannot relate to the reading text in textbooks. This is because of the contents that are not localized. If the contents are not localized, then students will feel unfamiliar. For instance, if the texts are about Western people and culture, students probably have no clue at all, which means they cannot relate to the content of the text. In addition, foreigners' name will also be confusing as they are not familiar with the pronunciation of the names, how the surname and family name work, which will make it more confusing. Another example is when the text is about culture that is not available in Malaysia, it will be harder for them to understand the content if being compared to a text that is about culture that is being practiced among Malaysians. In short, when the texts do not mention topics about students' interests and they cannot relate to them, the text will become uninteresting and they will feel unmotivated to read and to understand the whole text. Next, solution. The solution to the problem, according to the Tomlinson principle, is what is being taught should be perceived by learners as relevant and useful. This means that the reading materials should be relevant and useful to be used in teaching and learning process. The teaching points are relevant and useful by relating them to learners' interests. Firstly, teachers need to prepare reading materials based on students' interests and prior knowledge to sustain learners' curiosity and attention. The first thing that must be considered when looking at the reader side of the reading process is the interest of the students. Before the lesson begins, teachers need to find the interest of the students in that class. For example, history figures that they like, foods, cultures, or places of interest that they want to discuss about. So students will find that the reading texts are relevant and useful for them. Next, localize the materials. When the reading materials are localized, such as the text discussing about the culture that are being practiced among the students, they can relate to the text better. In addition, using localized materials is like appreciating the cultural and social identities of the students. So students will indeed understand this appreciation and also will find the contents of the text useful. Consequently, they can understand the contents better and their performance on reading comprehension is enhanced. Lastly, the other way to solve the problem is by devising readiness activities that can increase interest of the students towards the reading text. For instance, teachers can prepare a video or a slideshow that will be explaining about the topics in the reading text that they are required to read, which then will help learners activate their minds prior to experiencing text. When they are exposed to the content of the reading materials during the readiness activity, they will become familiar with the topic, hence finding the topic relevant and useful.
Hi, my name is Nursyaidatul Najeeha Binti Sonny. Okay, moving on to the conclusion. Based on our discussion, we can conclude that there are several issues related to the development of materials used in reading skills. By referring to Tomlinson's principles and procedure of material development, these issues can be solved by implementing the principles suggested. To sum it up, there are three problems, including materials, textbook content are not engaging. According to Tomlinson, materials should achieve impact, hence textbook content should be updated by improving or adding illustration to engage students' interests. Another issue that includes the textbook as a reading material is it is confusing and incomprehensible. The solution would be to cater to students' level and needs. Lastly, textbook contents are irrelevant. Thus, textbook content for reading materials should focus students' prior knowledge and locate it to something familiar to them.